In my experience, I think everybody suffers from it at some point or the other, whether you call it imposter syndrome or you really just sort of take that moment to say, am I in the right space? Right? Like, the interesting part is I have mentored men and women throughout the course of my career, and men also suffer from it at some point in their career. While they exude a lot of confidence, et cetera. And we always sort of see this perspective of, well, why do they think they can do that job? Like they've never done that job before. Like, why are they applying for it?
Welcome to Yo, the podcast that celebrates women who are leading with impact and redefining success. I'm your host, Sophie, and each week we'll bring you powerful stories and practical insights to empower and fuel your own leadership journey. Today, Robin Sutara joins us. From repairing Apache helicopters near the Korean DMZ to the corporate battlefield, Robin has demonstrated success in navigating the high-stress complexities of data-led transformations. She has consulted with hundreds of organizations on data strategy, data culture, and building diverse data teams. Robin has had an eclectic career path in the technical and business functions with more than 2 decades in tech companies, including Microsoft and Databricks. She also has achieved multiple academic accomplishments, from her Juris Doctorate to a Master's in Law to Engineering Leadership. From her first technical role as an entry-level consumer support engineer to her current role in the C-suite, Robin supports creating an inclusive workplace and is currently chair of Women in Data USA, as well as an advisor for several early startup organizations. She was also recognized in 2023 as a top 20 Women in Data and Tech, Data IQ 100 Most Influential People in Data, and Women Tech Speaker of the Year finalist. In our conversation today, we spoke about finding your superpower, giving yourself grace, and how her calendar manages her life. I cannot wait to share this one. Hi, Robin. Welcome to the podcast today. I know we've spoken a few times before this, and your background, your story is pretty inspiring. So wanted to obviously have a conversation with you today and hear more about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Really looking forward to the conversation. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, of course. So first things first, we'd love to give people a little bit of a background behind you, where you are today, and your story from, I don't know whether it was a little kid up till now.
A long time. I promise. Despite the fact that I look a little old today, it's been a long week already. But it seems like a super long story. So Robin Sutara, currently I'm the field CDO with Databricks. Essentially what that means is that I travel all over the world. Although I am actually home this week, I typically am on the road, and I get to consult with some of the most amazing customers and organizations as they think about how do they execute against their data and AI strategy. Oftentimes, as a company like Databricks comes in and just talks about technology, I actually talk about everything else but technology. How do we think about people, process, organization, change management, all of the things that you need to be successful with your data and AI execution and transformation as an organization. I've been with Databricks for about 2.5 years. I'm currently based in the Seattle area, but prior to here, I was based out of London. Your accent actually is not like mine, but I did live in London for a few years. Moved back to the US about a year ago. Prior to Databricks, I spent 23 years with Microsoft, and they are the ones who actually relocated me from the US into London. Obviously, over 23 years, you sort of do various roles. I was originally hired by them in the late 90s to support IE5 on Windows 3.1. So I started in a technical role helping consumers, and over the course of the 2 decades took on various functions and roles, some of them technical, some of them business. My last few roles there were really more focused on business, change management, execution. Obviously, Microsoft is a great success story as you think about digital and data transformation. And so I got lots of great experiences and war wounds and scabs and all sorts of things as you take them on that journey. My last 2 roles there, though, were really Chief Operating Officer for Azure Data Engineering, which was a phenomenal opportunity. Microsoft obviously has a great portfolio around data, the Azure Databricks being one of them, which is what got me familiar with this product. And then I closed my career there as the Chief Data Officer of Microsoft UK. So yeah, lots and lots of experiences. But I have to admit, I think everybody always says, how did you first get involved with data? before I even got into technology, I actually didn't come from a STEM background. I started in computer engineering, but I ran out of money to finish school. So I enlisted in the US Army, where I had the opportunity to work on Apache helicopters on the weapons and electrical systems in the Korea on the DMZ. And so it was a phenomenal opportunity, I think. So for all of you listening who are not traditional STEM backgrounds, I promise there is a career for you in technology, especially in data and AI. And so there's all sorts of paths to get there. And so I love to say that I have taken my career full circle from Apache helicopter to Apache Spark. And yeah, it's an amazing, amazing space to be in.
And it's a slightly unconventional background, like you say. It's not, going through the university or college route and then straight into, I don't know, a consultancy or, a business to dive you in to be a developer and then working your way up. How
Yeah.
did you find that transition going from the military into the world of technology?
I think, interestingly, I have found, at least in my career, that every opportunity is something that you can grow into your next opportunity. So I remember, for example, sitting in Korea, and at the time, people are going to laugh at this, but there weren't computers. Like people just didn't use them on a regular basis. And so I remember, Microsoft came out with this brand new product called Excel. Nobody really knew what it was or what it was going to be able to do, but because it was a computer program and because computers were primarily typing, I remember people looking at me and saying, "Well, you're the only woman in the unit. You should go do that thing because it's typing." It's like, okay, we'll figure that out. Yeah, I really and Word absolutely was more like dictation, taking notes, writing letters, etc. But the power was really in the data. And so, how do you take things like Excel continues to be probably one of the best databases I think in the world, right? Like people really do, and that's exactly what we used it as. How do we track Apache maintenance records in Excel to be able to understand when was the last time that we swapped out the, 50 millimeter machine gun components on that particular aircraft? And so I remember sort of working on those things thinking, okay, so I didn't grow up in engineering like I thought I was going to. I didn't get that traditional sort of just diploma to go directly in. So how was I going to translate what I was learning today into technology? Oh, we can think about how do we use this new technology called a computer and a database to track things that we're working on today. And so I remember doing that thinking, this is where the future is. Like, I am going to go work at Microsoft. Like, this idea that they have that it's not just going to be something that big companies like NASA work on, and it's not going to be something for the super wealthy. Really, they had this mission of everybody was going to work on a computer. And so for me, it was how do we gravitate toward that mission and how do I use what I'm doing today? And how can I take every opportunity that when nobody else wants to do it, can I figure out a way to take advantage of that as an opportunity for me to grow and develop and learn something new, to continue to grow those skills and competencies for where I want to be in the future when I grow up.
Yeah, it's funny how going from, like you say, working on helicopters, but just using an Excel spreadsheet can then lead you into a world of technology, which now is so vast. There's so much to technology, but starting there, it just gives you that opportunity to go, oh, this is interesting. Now let me try something else and see how it works and then figure it out, like you say, figure it
Yeah,
out along the way.
absolutely.
Yeah. And what were, I suppose, some of the biggest challenges you faced actually as a woman in a traditionally male dominant environment, both in, the military background and now in technology?
Yeah, I feel like I'm always the only woman in the room, right? No matter what career I seem to choose. My parents would probably say it's because I was a tomboy as a kid, but I do tend to gravitate toward the spaces that are primarily male dominated. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is um, I like to break the rules a little bit, right? I think a little bit of it is being a rebel to say, oh, you say a girl can't do this or a woman can't do this. I'll show you. Let me show you how I can do that. And so can I get into that space? But I think the other thing is really gravitating toward what are you passionate about? Like, what are you excited about? What gets you happy to go to work? And how do you translate that into a career? So I'm the mom of four girls, and I always tried to tell them, look, doesn't matter what you study, your career will never be that thing that you study. I mean, my sister studied geology, right? She now works at one of the largest medical providers in the world. Like, how you will not necessarily do that thing that you study. So really gravitate toward what are the things that you really like to do. And that is what's going to lead you to the next step. And so for me, it was always about being a little bit of a rebel and sort of bulking the system and right figuring out it. I never started on the path of, oh, I'm going to ground break for all women that follow me. I love to think that that's what I'm doing now, but that was definitely not where I started. Where I started was, what are the things that I really like to do? I like to figure out things that are broken. I like to create structure out of chaos. I like to, right, help people and lead people in a way that it gives them safety and an environment and agility. And how are we going to solve some of these big, complicated problems that we're trying to solve? And what is my contribution to that? And how do I grow teams and organizations that can contribute to some of that? And so I always gravitated toward, what are the things I like to do? And then what are the things I want to grow and learn and develop? And what's the next role or opportunity? And they happen to be male dominated, but I don't know that I ever viewed that as a prohibitor. I do think through the course of my career, there are times where it's been lonely. Yeah, where it's been a little hard, where you do sit at the table and you look around. I once had a female leader, I think, that gave me the best piece of advice about halfway through my career, in that it takes more than just having a seat at the table. It's making sure that you fight for your voice at the table. And I think, right, ever since she gave me that advice, it really has been, look, I have a unique perspective and a unique experience and a different background, obviously, which I did share with you all, right? That nobody else around this table has. And so, how do I translate that into something that's unique and novel? And I am not going to be your yes person, but what I will tell you is why I don't think that will work, or why I do think that will work, or what is the direction that I think we should go. And so make sure that when you get that seat at the table, right, that you're using your unique background and your unique experiences, because nobody else has that they can bring into the conversation. And that's what's going to give you, I think, the confidence to be able to sit in those scenarios where you are the only woman and you have a unique point of view that you can bring.
Yeah, it is about finding your confidence to use your voice. And I think the more you do it, the more you will be confident enough to do it. So I think that's really important. And you're not the only one to say that around the confidence piece and actually using your voice. Like you say, you can sit at the table, but are you actually adding value to that conversation or that business at that time?
Yeah. And I think it's okay to even say sometimes, I once had a leader say, well, you need to speak in every meeting. It's like, if I speak, it's going to be important. It's going to be something that you haven't heard before. And if I agree with the direction, like, why do you need somebody else just to affirm, right, what you've already said or what's already been shared? And so I think there is something to be having, confidence, but make sure that the reason that you should have confidence is because that unique value attribution that you're bringing. So you don't have to just speak to speak. There's lots of men that do that. You don't need to do that, right? Really think about, what is your background or expertise or experience or capability or competency that's going to add something novel to the conversation, and or give a contradicting point of view. It's even okay if you don't agree with everybody around the table. If you sort of say, oh, wait a minute, have you thought about, or we haven't considered this other factor or this other direction? And so having that confidence. I will say though, I was just struggling with this a little bit this morning. That doesn't mean that imposter syndrome goes away, right? It's one thing to have confidence and speak up at the table. That doesn't mean that you will always feel like, right, you're in the right place at the right time. There are definitely times where I look around and still think like, oh my gosh, how the heck did I end up here? Like, why am I sitting in this, in this table with all of these CEOs and I'm the only one who's saying no? We didn't think about this other thing. And so I think part of it is confidence, but in my experience, that doesn't completely negate. There will be times where you feel like, I know that this is the right direction. I'm not quite sure if I should say it because I'm not sure that I should be in this scenario. I just watched this great interview with Barack Obama, right, who essentially was talking about people are people. So even when you're sitting in the UN in front of all of these leaders of the world, they're all just people. And so really, remembering that and remembering that you have every right to be there just as much as they do. And they are probably also sometimes looking around the table saying, oh my gosh, how did I end up there? Because you know that everybody is, sort of feeling that way. Absolutely. Use that as a way to articulate, as part of the conversation.
A few things to touch upon there that I like. And it's talking about everyone's background is different. Everyone has a different, I suppose, upbringing and, culture, diversity. And it's a blessing to be able to bring these things to the table. So actually lean into it more. We as women, we will think slightly differently to men half the time, and we might have a little bit more empathy or compassion and go, oh, well, we didn't think about how that's going to affect this person or this team or this organization. So yeah, talk about it. You can talk about your own experiences and bring them into a business, because at the end of the day, that's why you were hired, not just to be another person sitting at the table, should we say. And you touch upon imposter syndrome. This is an interesting one because I've done a few like women in tech forums and women in leadership forums. And there was one person who said, and I will always remember it, she was like, I don't believe in imposter syndrome. So really interesting that you touched upon it, because it's something that I understand, and I've felt it sometimes. Dive into that a little bit more. Would love to hear how you get over imposter syndrome, if you do, or what you do to deal with it.
Yeah, in my experience, I think everybody suffers from it at some point or the other, whether you call it imposter syndrome or you really just sort of take that moment to say, am I in the right space? Right. The interesting part is I have mentored men and women throughout the course of my career, and men also suffer from it at some point in their career. While they exude a lot of confidence, et cetera. And we always sort of see this perspective of, well, why do they think they can do that job? Like they've never done that job before. Like, why are they applying for it? They are almost raised with this, like you can do anything. And so
Mhm.
I think we think about how do we create that same environment for our daughters, for our sisters, for the women that are coming up for the next generation? Because it does come down to maybe you don't feel like you have a seat at the table, but they hired you because you have a unique point of view. And so grounding back on that, you know what, maybe I don't belong at this table, but guess what? I'm going to bring that unique perspective, which is what you hired me for. And it's either going to help us, continue to drive the business forward or make an impact on society or, create a better world for those around us, et cetera. But it is what you brought me into the group to be able to do. And so that's what I'm going to do. And so I think just remembering your I always find if I ground on my superpower, what is my unique value attribution, right? And for me, it is right? Like I'm a barred attorney. I have intellectual property law experience. I grew up in the military. I have lived in, 17 different countries. There are a lot of things that make me very unique
Yeah.
that I just have to remind myself that's my superpower is nobody else has that lived experience, that cultural background, the education that I do, right? And sort of being able to do those things and do the jobs that I have done throughout the course of my history. And everyone around the table has that unique value attribution. And it's only the coming together of all those perspectives that's going to help us solve some of these big, complex problems across the ecosystem. So when you have that imposter syndrome, in my experience, ground in your superpower and just remember that's why you're there. That's
Yeah.
the sort of capability that you have. And if you articulate that and then they decide that it's not incremental value to the team, then you'll find the next opportunity because someone out there wants that superpower to help them improve.
Sometimes it's a case of remembering where you've come from, everything you have achieved, like you say, go back and actually look over your career and look over your life and go, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And then hopefully it will give you that superpower, or you can be able to think and be like, okay, I do have a superpower because I've managed to get through all of this and I'm still here, I'm
Exactly.
still surviving.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. Now, it'd be rude not to talk about obviously your experience within the data space because you've done so much. I would love to hear, as someone who's helped hundreds of organizations with data strategy and transformation, what would you say are the most common mistakes companies make when it comes to implementing data-led change?
I think a majority of what I do today is actually those organizations that have this heavy dependency on technology. I think any organization that looks and says, well, we can solve that with tech, you're missing the opportunity, right, to really transform your organization. Technology will only take you so far. I love to say tech is probably 10% of a transformation, to be honest with you. The other 90% is people and process that's going to preclude you from being successful. So it's always interesting to me to go in and we say, so help me understand your data strategy. And then they bring out this list of tech that they're going to implement, right? We're going to stand up this platform and we're going to bring in this tool and this, right? This ISV is going to help us solve this. And it's like, oh, all great to build sort of the foundations that you need in place. You have to have tech. And how are you bringing people along on the journey? What's your change management plan? Or how are you building awareness of what you're doing to help them be more effective or efficient at their job? How are you thinking about enablement, right? Especially with AI, everybody's so worried about what does that mean for my job? How is that going to transform the way that I do, my day-to-day activities? How is my job going to go away? Like I hear that a lot. And so if you think about it, tech isn't going to solve those problems. What's going to solve those problems is having a people-centric approach to your data and AI strategy. How are we going to enable people across the organization that, yes, your job may not look the same today, but guess what? You have that domain area of expertise of the business. You have all of this experience that we aren't going to displace with AI. We are just going to allow you to solve all the problems you haven't had time for. And that requires enablement and bringing people along on that journey with you, as opposed to really just plopping down a platform and saying, okay, now we've solved all of our transformation issues. So for what I work on with most organizations is, okay, how do we now think about the people behind that? How do we make sure that we're grounded in your mission and vision? How do we set up the right principles? How do we set up enablement? How do we create a safe space for innovation that minimizes the risk or exposure to risk that we have as an organization? And so I think for me, for those organizations that are struggling, you can almost look back at it and see this heavy dependency on technology to displace people or process without taking all three of those aspects into consideration.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of people forget about the people aspect when we're talking around not just technology, but a lot of things within a business. But everything comes down to people, because at the end of the day, who buys your product? It's people. Yes, it's businesses, but it's people that run the businesses.
Exactly.
So everything comes down to the people. So staying on that topic around people, you've led some pretty large teams within your time. How do you approach leading teams in a high stress environment, whether it is in a corporate setting or complex technical project?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things I always sort of ground on. The one is, how do I drive clarity for the organization? I think a lot of times, particularly in the pace of innovation that we're in right now, it's really easy to get a lot of organizations I hear talk about that, even than we do here, data bricks, like, building the plane while we're flying it, or right, building the car while we're driving it. Like all of these things of things are moving so quickly. How do we make sure that people have that vision of what we're trying to achieve and accomplish? So even if the puck slightly shifts as you're going through that, if everybody understands the end goal and objective and what you're trying to deliver, and that requires a leader that's helping you drive clarity, right? And really setting that tone and the vision and where you're going to go, and how you get there may change as as technology evolves, or as people evolve and people shift and move into different roles or grow and develop into bigger roles. How do you really create that space? The other thing is creating a safe space for innovation. I think oftentimes, particularly when you're talking to executives, it's always about minimizing your risk for failure. I think the truly innovative teams and organizations that I have worked with have some level and degree of lessons learned from things that didn't work that we expected, right? Innovation truly comes by learning from things that don't work. And so how are you going to then create your V2, your V3, your V4 to continue to evolve, whether it's a product or a project or a business in sort of its capability? You have to create the space where you can innovate, and that requires some expectation that there will be some failure, including, I think, particularly right now, lots of organizations are looking at AI and saying, look, we made these big investments, what's our return on our investment? And by approaching that to say, look, these are the three things that we learned from those AI projects that we started 12 months ago, and what did and didn't work for our organization, and how we were actually able to transform the way that we delivered products or service to our customers. By taking that, you make the next product better. And so I think every leader needs to think about some degree of failure or lessons learned from things that don't work the way that you expect, and how you're going to deliver that. And then I think for me, it definitely took a long time. The first manager role I ever had, I remember my team giving me feedback that I was driven and ruthless and robotic. And I realized, like, I have to remember that it's people, that I'm not just driving the business, that I have to connect with people as people. And that means sharing things like, oh, yeah, I have kids, right? And we're going to do this. And how are you? And
Yeah.
what's your holiday going to be like, et cetera. And so I think even my sister still teases me like hashtag ruthless, right? Like it's one thing to be driven and want to accomplish things, but it's at the same token, you spend most of your waking hours at work. And so
Yeah.
you have to make it, a connection to the people that you work with because you're all trying to achieve the same goals and objectives. And that means knowing them as a person, knowing their unique value attribution. We
Mm-hmm.
talked about superpowers. If I
Yeah.
can build a team where I'm helping them build, grow, and develop and identify what are their superpowers. Why did I bring them into the team? I don't want a bunch of people like me. That would be a horrible team. I need
Yeah.
people that have these different experiences, education, cultural background, etc., so that we can deliver the best products and the best services for customers. And so making sure that you're connecting with those people so that you can help them think about that and what does it look like and what are they trying to achieve and how is this role going to help them grow and develop into their aspirations and what makes them happy.
It's known that women who are in leadership roles are often tarnished as ruthless, which is sometimes quite, it's quite bad. And I think it's slightly different when men are in leadership roles because I think sometimes it can be slightly different. So I don't know from your experience, have you seen that? Have you been tarnished with some of these brushes like you mentioned and feeling like, oh, actually, well, my peers are similar to me, but they don't seem to have the same brush, if that makes sense.
Eh, I think there will be people. I think there have absolutely been people across my career that would either say, well, she's horribly ruthless, and no, he's just right leading the team
Mm-hmm.
in this, in this aspirational way, right? Or just like, oh, she's bossy. Oh, no, he's right. He's leading with authority, et cetera. And so I think you will always have people that,
Yeah.
based on their lived experience, will interpret. What I try to do is approach it with best of intentions, right? Like my expectation is that people aren't saying that because they want to tarnish you or tarnish your career or create this image or perception. And you also have to decide, like, how much are you going to let it bother me? At some point, I sort of looked at it to say, you know what, maybe I am in some capacity a little ruthless and a little driven, and I like to do things well, and I want to set my team up for success. And right, I always sort of have told my teams, like, if I'm reporting to you tomorrow, then I've accomplished my goal because that means that you achieved what you wanted
Yeah.
to and got to where you wanted to go. And so how do you think about creating a culture that you are striving for excellence, but at
Mm.
the same token, keeping that human centricity to it?
Yeah.
And so just for me, it's always about keep the best of intentions. You can have the opinion that you have, and how much am I going to let it bother me or change my behaviors? Not to say, right, that I want people to think that I'm robotic, which as a frontline manager with 5 people versus, leading organizations of a few hundred, it definitely changed my perception of how do I
Yeah.
connect with people on a people basis. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's work, and yes, there are things that we have to get done, but you have to figure out it's essentially your work family, right? At some point, and with your family, you have the good and the bad, and you figure out how to live together in a way that allows you to bring the joy to work every day. And so, figuring, I think, how to balance that in a way. So just keep in mind best of intentions and just don't let the things bother you could bother you. I tend to be over analytical. Like my husband says this a lot. Like somebody will say something and then I won't say anything at work, but I'll come home and then I'll contemplate like, what did they mean exactly by that? Like, you're right. What did I do that led to that comment? But I try to keep that sort of behind the doors as I analyze it on, okay, is that how they really meant it? Did I misconstrue it out of context? And even if I didn't, if it was met with some right sort of disparate or distinguishing between me and a male counterpart behaving exactly the same way, do I care enough to let it bother me, or am I going to continue to drive forward in the way that I think is best, in the way that I think is going to help us drive the business forward, in the way that it's going to help my customers be successful? And I try to take the latter approach.
There's nothing wrong with being driven, ambitious, and a go-getter as a female. I'll put that out there. So if
Exactly.
people class it as ruthless, then that's up to them. Carry on is what I'd say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Amazing. So you've been deeply involved with women in data in the USA, and obviously are very passionate about supporting more women getting into technology and leadership roles as well. What do you think needs to change in the industry to make it more of an inclusive and supportive environment for women, especially in those sort of leadership roles?
Yeah, I think right now is an interesting era, right? If you think about, at least here in the US, we've seen some level of de-investment into DE&I specific programs. I'm reading lots of headlines around ecosystems built on meritocracy, right? Sort of all of these aspects. I think interestingly, though, those systems only work if everybody starts at the same equal sort, right? There's a difference between equality and equity, right? And we've had this conversation before. Like, if you reward everybody equally, that is not exactly driving equity if I came from a different starting point than everyone else. And so I think, as I think about the next generation and what are the things that I can do to create a difference, it's changing the systemic things that create this inequity of the starting point. And so does that mean, fighting for incremental opportunities for non-traditional backgrounds and experiences? Not everybody is going to follow a traditional STEM background. So, what are the things that I can do that help us create systems that support introducing people from languages, from arts, from social sciences, et cetera, to enter technology fields because they bring phenomenal experiences and backgrounds that are diverse from a traditional STEM. And so, how do we create opportunities for both of those? And to me, that requires us rethinking some of the systemic things that we can control, or how do we raise the systemic issues that aren't within our control to raise more awareness and drive transformation and change. Some of the work, for example, that I've done in the UK around being data driven for women's safety, right? That requires, how do we rethink the ecosystems that exist, the education, the awareness, the data led transformation of government and legislation. I just think you have to think about what are those things that you're passionate about where you can try to change the systemic issues that are preventing us from getting more diversity and representation. And if I can change even one of those things, that makes it easier for the next generation to then tackle the next thing to solve for the generation after them, then I feel like, I've delivered something of a success in that step forward.
Talking about people that are coming from different backgrounds and bringing them into technology and exposing them to the environment. I was speaking to someone the other day, and what she does, she's a CIO of a big firm within the healthcare industry, but they have a retail store. She'll literally take people off the shop floor and be like, come on, you're going to come and do technology. And then find an opportunity for them where they can utilize their skill set, whether it is customer service or whatever it may be. And I love that. I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I can literally imagine someone walking in and grabbing someone going, right, you're coming to the corporate world with me.
That's amazing. But if you think about it, who has a better exposure into what customers are doing on the shop floor than somebody that's worked on the shop floor, right? And so I think anybody who has the capability and capacity to be able to do such things like that, you are creating the next generation of a diverse workforce that's going to just help us drive technology even further than we ever could if you were to follow our traditional path.
And if we look inside of a organization and we're talking about tech businesses or businesses with a large tech presence, what do you believe is the most important steps organizations can take to promote more women into the leadership positions for the company?
I think it really is creating those opportunities where you're actively encouraging them to apply. When I look back at my career, the one regret I have is not being super explicit about building out sponsorship. And I think there is some level of onus of not just women, but also male allies in the ecosystem to be sponsors, to identify the opportunities for those women in your organizations to grow into those leadership roles. You are behind closed doors in these leadership meetings. It's not right. It's not like the women in your org don't want to apply, or they don't want to grow, or they don't want to continue their career. You have to sort of represent their voice to say, I have the perfect candidate for that net new leadership role that we're going to create. And here's who I want to sponsor forward for that opportunity and help them get a leg up. Right. I remember the first half of my career, I felt like every promotion was just a battle. And every time I got a new male leader, I had to reprove myself to the male leader to justify why I should be promoted to the next level. And at some point, you hit this, I absolutely still believe the glass ceiling is still there, where you sort of feel like, if I stay in this team, if I stay in this organization, if I stay in this role, can I continue to grow and develop? And yes, there's some level of capabilities or competencies, but you can't get promoted. And if you don't have a sponsor who's going to identify that area of opportunity outside of your span of what you can see and what you can control, then we're never going to create net new opportunities. Organizations are growing phenomenally fast. I did a venture capital event in New York a few weeks ago. And it was really interesting to me how many female led organizations or female founded organizations exist out there. It's so small. And why is that? It's not that they don't have the problems to solve or the thought, right, or the creativity to solve for those problems, but we're not giving them enough opportunities. We don't have people in those seats of authority or the seats of control that are sponsoring this net new creation of these opportunities. And I think the onus comes on all of us, right, where we have the power to do so, to sponsor them, right, into that next level of leadership.
I agree with that. I think it is a case of finding a mentor or a sponsor within a business who can really help and lift you up. And if that is actually your direct line manager, amazing. If not, look elsewhere, especially if it's a
Mhm.
larger organization. There's so many people within a business, and there's people that will back you. And when they walk into their meetings and, the board meetings, they will shout your name. So you need to find those people to elevate you, to get you, going upwards. And it is quite funny. And you worked in London, right? So you probably know the culture in the UK, maybe before the pandemic more so, but very much going down the pub, have a few drinks. And
Mhm.
obviously, a lot of men do that, right? A lot of men will go to the pub after work and have a few drinks, and they'll meet someone who can elevate them, and they can network with these people within their organization and outside as well. And I think as a female with a lot of things going on outside of work as well, we don't always do that. We don't always put ourselves in these networking situations
Mhm.
that can elevate ourselves. So that's another thing to maybe think about. And I'm not saying go out to the pub every day, but are there opportunities where you can reach out to someone to be like, hi, can you mentor me or can you help support me and take me to the next level?
I think that's such an interesting point, because we always sort of look at it and say, I think, at least for me, I kept thinking, like, how are those men getting promoted above me? Like, I just don't understand what their delivery, because they had a sponsor, right? They had some level of championship. I've worked for plenty of leaders who have talked about their sponsors and their ecosystem that help lift them up. And I think, when I look back, I think, well, why didn't I do that way earlier? Like, why wasn't I explicit about it? I guess I always sort of felt like if I work really hard, people identify it and sponsors will just come, right? And I think you're right. It doesn't happen that way. And while we feel like sometimes we don't always have the same opportunity, because you're right, I have to get home and take care of kids or parents or grocery shopping or laundry or any of the 5,000 other things that I need to get done outside of the 20-hour working days that I'm doing. But it requires some level of effort and lift. And I have to admit, the last half of my career, by putting more of a focused effort on connecting with communities that mattered to me, like women in data, like women leaders in data and analytics, because I had such limited time, being really focused on what were those networks and communities that I was going to connect with, that I was going to invest some level of my time, because I wanted the opportunities that would introduce in expanding my network. But also, it helps me then identify others that I can lift, that I can connect into my network that they may not have exposure to. And that's where I think men are much better about creating those synergies of, oh, I have a friend of a friend. And we don't do that quite as often because we're not as connected into those communities. So be really, really deliberate about what communities are going to bring you value and what communities can you bring value to. Because you have this whole ecosystem that you've built up over the course of your jobs and your careers. And there's areas of opportunity for that reciprocation that I think women don't always identify as quickly as men do.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd like to dive into a little bit more, and if you don't mind sharing, just around how you manage to balance, I suppose, your life. Obviously, you've got kids, you're married, you've had an amazing career so far. How have you balanced everything, or what do you think that the trick is, or what's got you through, uh, I suppose, day to day?
Yeah, I live off my calendar. Yes, I think if anybody were to ever look at my diary or my calendar, they would literally lose their mind, because I schedule everything from my workout in the morning to shower time. Right, I'm going to do in the evenings. Like tonight, it says like bake bread for the holidays that are coming up. I have to put everything in my calendar or it won't get done at all. But the other thing is being a little graceful with myself that my calendar will never always be exactly as my calendar is, right? I will have to shift and move things. I think I always sort of tease. So I also train for iron distance triathlons in my spare time. So I always have to get in some level of a workout almost every day. And so people are looking at my diary like, did you really go for an hour run and then a 30-minute swim? And then you came into work at 6 a.m. to start calls with Europe? And it's like, yes, I did, but only because it was in my calendar. If that had not been that way, I don't think it could have been done. So there's a couple of things. One is I schedule everything out. Two is I have to remember to be gracious that things may slip out slightly. And so how do I know in my mind what those priorities are, right? And maybe I won't get the bread baked tonight for the holiday. Can I do it tomorrow? And is that okay? Probably. Nobody's going to notice if I baked it on Tuesday or Wednesday, right? And so think about those things that you can control and that you can schedule, and then give yourself a little bit of grace for those things that don't work out exactly as planned. And then find the things that allow you the freedom to think and problem solve. I think it's really easy post pandemic to get into this world of, right, during the pandemic, we almost all went from call to call to call to call. Then post pandemic, now we're call to travel to call to travel to, right? And we're constantly trying to be that on where we're delivering all the time. I found over the last year or so, I really have to be explicit about blocking time that gives me the freedom to think and not be connected, whether that's listening to a podcast to learn some new capability or technology that's coming out, or it's really to disconnect completely and just give my brain the amount of time to think on a walk or on a run, right? Baking or cooking or taking a shower, just something where you're not connected. Make sure that you do those things because it's hard to creatively, I think, solve for things when you're always in this transactional mode of problem solving and back to back calls that we got into the habit during the pandemic
I
of.
didn't know that about you doing a triathlon. So that's pretty
Yeah.
impressive. Yeah, I'd rather you than me, put it that way. Going back into, I suppose, your experience and just hearing from what you've learned over your time, what is one lesson that you wish you would have known 10, 15, 20 years ago around leadership that you're going to take forward with you?
I think definitely the sponsor thing. Like anybody who feels like you've stagnated in your career, take a step back to sort of say, who are my mentors? Who are my cheerleaders and my champions? And then who is my sponsor? Who is the person that's going to help me identify those opportunities that I don't even see or that I might have the opportunity? But I guess if it were specific to leadership, I think I would go back to maybe what we talked about earlier, which is know your superpower and
Mhm.
give yourself some grace, right? Like I really think early in my career, if I had been able to articulate what is that unique value proposition, what is the thing that I bring that nobody else can sort of bring to this role, would have made a ton of interviews way more easier, right? Because I was constantly trying to figure out what was the leader looking for. How did I think I could change myself to be able to address that leadership opportunity or that next role or that next capability? Yes, you will take a job because you want to grow and develop and you want to learn something new. For example, me leaving the business and going into that engineering role as a COO, I remember approaching that role thinking, look, here's my superpower. I create structure out of chaos, and you are looking to grow your organization 3x over the next 2 years. You are going to need somebody that can create process and frameworks and structure for you. And I don't understand, despite the fact that I work at Microsoft for so long, I don't understand how we actually create product. How do you develop out the roadmap? How do you gather customer requirements to build that out, et cetera? And so for me, I approached every interview in that cycle saying, okay, I now know what my superpower is and what I'm going to bring to this role. And I can clearly articulate what the value proposition I'm going to get out of it. And so I think I wish I had known early in my career, don't always pivot on what they need. Figure out what is your superpower and then figure out the story that your superpower is exactly what they need, whether they wrote it in the job description or not. Because I have to admit, you look at some of the job descriptions today and I'm thinking, all of you want to hire all these unicorns. Like that just doesn't exist. And so as you read through them, really think about what are your experiences, what's your capabilities, what's your competencies, and that's what you sell to the interviewer is those things.
You talk around job descriptions. I always say just take them with a pinch of salt because half
Mm.
the time people don't actually know what they want. And when you're in front of them, they'll realize. So,
Yeah.
yeah, take your superpower into that interview and apply for that job anyway because you never know what's going to happen. And what would you say is one thing that has made the biggest impact on your success?
Yeah, I think it's having a great ecosystem, right? Like you and I have met through multiple communities. I think it is really, figuring out those right. How do I build out that strong network? And for me, that's where I've always identified, my mentors, I have some phenomenal cheerleaders and champions that I've had, partnerships either as a stakeholder or a business partner or even directs, or I've reported to them that I still stay in contact with 20 years later, right? And I think it is all about building that connection with people, whether it's via a network or via direct relationships or direct working relationships. There's just so much opportunity, I think, when you have the right people around you. And they're there when you suffer from that imposter syndrome, right? They're the ones who are going to be, I think, the ones that sort of talk you off the ledge to say, absolutely, you can do this. They're also going to be the ones that call you and say, yeah, you probably shouldn't have done that. Like, here's another way to approach it, right? So I think having that community of trusted advisors or that board of directors around you that have a vested interest in you and your success, and being a board of director or being that advisor for others across the ecosystem. I just think it's so critical.
It all comes down to people. Everything comes down to people at the end of the
Exactly.
day and supporting
Right.
other people. Now, we could probably talk for another few hours because there's so many questions, but I want to finish on one question, and you've probably answered it a little bit here and there. So I'll give you a few seconds to maybe think of something else. But my closing question is, what is one piece of advice you'd give your younger self or your daughters?
Um, Yeah, I think the one piece of advice that I would give myself really is focused on that, right? Being graceful to yourself. I think we strive all the time, especially as women, for perfection. Like we always feel like we have to know exactly what do I want to study in university? What does my career have to be? What does this role have to do? What is my next role? How am I going to deliver for my family? How am I going to take care of my parents? How am I going to make sure the dog goes for a walk? Like you have all of these pressures going onto yourself. I actually came from an abusive relationship where I left a abusive husband. And I remember leaving that thinking, how am I ever going to make it on my own? How am I ever going to be exactly what my girls need or my daughters need? How am I going to provide? How am I going to make sure I have a job? How am I going to, there's so much unknown. And so be graceful for yourself with yourself. Things will not always go as expected, but you know what? You have phenomenal resiliency. You have amazing creativity. You have your own superpower that you can provide in those scenarios. And so, just be comfortable with yourself and be graceful to yourself.
I love that. I'm going to take that one away. Perfect. Thank you so much, Robin. Really appreciate you taking the time today. And yeah, I'm sure we're going to have a few more conversations after this anyway.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sophie. I appreciate it.